All right, cool. A lot of people were upset that there wasn't enough blood in
Well,
the battle.
bring back
Yeah,
V. I
well,
didn't list my whole thing. I actually have two more claims to make. He claims that I say everything is genetic. I never claimed that, and he claims that he never said that all environmental factor can be changed when he did. Maybe we can discuss this now.
well, you want him back?
If he wants. He left and I didn't have time to read my whole list.
Hang on, hang on.
If the blood gods are not satisfied,
Okay, let me ask. I just asked him, and while he's doing that, yeah, because here were some of the super chats. Where Arcadia Hexley $10 says blood money for the blood gods. V did not satisfy. Thanks for reading my chats. Also, sorry I teased you about wet bread and booty fleece. Jesus Christ. A Venom Eagle $10. V claims that JF changes definitions and asks JF to go to Charles Darwin. Darwin did not define nature. Darwin defined natural selection to show it as the chief agent of change. Uh, and
absolutely.
and Baya 000 $10. That debate wasn't worth the 30 chickens I sacrificed beforehand. So
But you
that's
can still
why.
eat your chicken breast and legs, so it's all good.
Do you want to eat 30 chickens?
Sure, I mean, if you give
You
me
get
time,
that
if I can
protein
freeze them, make some nuggets.
Nuggets.
and nuggets. Okay, he just read it. He's typing, and let's see. It's a long one, so I'm gonna assume it's a no. A very long explanation on why no, but let's see. Okay. Ooh, novel. He's writing a little novel here for me. Let's see.
I'm gonna bet $5 that he says that I'm Jewish in some way. He brings back his JF as a Jew meme.
Tell me, fellas, have you ever seen a cornfield?
Yeah,
I did. When I was young, there was a cornfield where we were sleeping, me and my cousins, and at night we were going to get some corn from the cornfield, and we were depositing them in front of our neighbor's gallery. So when he was waking in the morning, he was seeing piles of corn in front of his door.
all right. His message is, but I think I said what I had to say. Definitions are important in science because they are required for the scientific method to work. Other people need to use those definitions in order to replicate the research and to use someone's papers to push the boundaries of science. If you just want to change the definitions and have a colloquial interpretation, then you can do that, but that's not science anymore. That's just philosophy and colloquialisms. Like I can't change what genes mean, and if I want to do that, I'd have to publish a paper in a science magazine and have other people test my theories. Science is very strict. You can't just make up shit and call it science. And I know JF knows this, which is why he is being disingenuous.
Well, my response to that is you'll notice if you look back at the episode, I've not redefined anything. I still know what a gene is. A gene is DNA. The DNA genes are in you, but they were also in your parents. All I ask to V is consider the fact that the genes are both in the parent and the child, it has effects because the genes will want to create parents that care for the child. That's all I'm asking. There's not a single redefinition in there. But I see that V has taken the route of SJWs, which is to use definitions and to care about definitions. I will never care about the definitions other than for its role in terms of communication. Yes, we need to agree on definitions to communicate, but once we agree on these definitions, we need to be able to talk about facts and talk about what happens to these genes, this nature that V is talking about. The nature in the child is also in the parent. That's all I'm asking you to consider, V.
All right. I hope he heard that. He's doing another type. Well, I can hop on. Yeah, yes, one more thing. It should be quick. All right, he'll hop on for a sec. He'll hop on for a sec.
You just have Andy writing back and forth for JF and V.
Yeah, I'm the middleman.
It's
It's like two
it's like
friends
in
hate
Fight
each other,
Club.
and I'm like, okay, hang on. Tell him I said this. Okay, one sec.
It's like in Fight Club when he says, "I feel like I'm between my parents fighting again."
Oh, that was a
Yeah,
great
yeah.
movie.
Oh yeah, what a great movie.
Oh, and I remember in a different episode, you said "Thank You for Smoking" was made by the guy who sold PayPal.
Yep.
So it was made by Elon Musk.
I do not know.
Hmm.
It was
I knew-
Elon Musk under PayPal?
Yes, he actually sold it so he could found Tesla.
Okay, well, when I listened to the director of Thank You for Smoking describing this situation, he said that there were 2 or 3 partners, and that the guy who funded Thank You for Smoking was one of the partners.
Oh, I see.
So I don't know if that would be Elon Musk. I think that if it was Elon Musk, he would have said it. So I would suspect it was someone else. Maybe someone who got out of the deal earlier.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. I don't see his name anywhere. Because I thought that was like an interesting little bit of information.
Yeah, it was on the DVD supplement information, which I always listen to religiously.
I used to always do that. I used to always like watch the DVDs and all the extras and the commentary. Okay,
Oh, guys, I was like the biggest fan of The Simpsons, and I watched the commentaries. Like, I had every season on DVD, commentaries on The Simpsons. I don't know why. Something about it was relaxing.
Yeah, no, it's very chill to watch that and hear like the behind the scenes of that stuff. Right, he should be here in a second.
Vlad, one of our fans who often calls Broadstar, says it was Elon Musk.
Oh,
You can
what?
find it online. Monsieur Z is spreading false stuff. Well, I wouldn't accuse him of that since he's Googling it live and he admitted that.
I mean,
It was.
they don't trust me because I goofed around with the media that one time.
There we
Fake
go.
news.
What up, V?
Yeah, Andy called me back. What's up?
Yeah, I just want to know, V, what is it that I redefined?
Well, it's on your thumbnail. Nature is nurture. And then if we look at the actual definitions in the science book, we can see exactly what they mean. So let me just, I guess, Google it if you want. If we're going to do this. Sorry, wasn't prepared.
No, no problem.
Someone in the chat can find the definitions faster. It doesn't matter. Like any sort of place where they have the definitions, I'll happily accept them because they're the same everywhere.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, if you want to make up a definition that you interpret is what you feel you're talking about when you say nurture, I'm fine going with it. I don't really care about that thumbnail, to be honest, but I want to know where I redefined anything.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter what I feel the definition is. See, this is the point. That's not scientific. Like when you
Okay.
deal with... Okay, right. Let's establish this. Is science based on the scientific method?
Well, science is based on a set of things. Some of them are philosophical assumptions. Some of them are the data that is acquired through empiricism. I guess we could call all of this the scientific method, yes.
Right. So I have a hypothesis, and then I make an experiment, test the hypothesis, I reach to a result, and then other people have to replicate my hypothesis, my experiment, and see that they reach the same conclusion.
That's all word salad. I'm asking, where
What do you
did I
mean it's word
redefine
salad?
anything?
Okay, so you're losing this argument and you want to go back. Fine. I'll
I mean,
find the definition in a bit. Just give
I
me a while.
haven't lost anything. It's just we're not going to redo the entire definition of science, right? I have a PhD, so I think I've went through this, and I think our audience knows what science is. So where did I redefine anything?
Well, I'm not saying that you don't know this. This is what is my point. I think you're being disingenuous and you're misleading people.
That's
So
an
the
attribution of
reason
intent,
I
and
was
it's wrong.
making my point is to understand why definitions are important. Because you asked me, it's like, what do you think the definitions are? This is not scientific, okay? You need to use the actual definition that scientists use so that other people can replicate the experiment. If
All right,
anyone
let's
uses
do an
whatever,
appeal to authority on the definitions. I will follow your
Yes,
authority,
this
whatever
is
you
how-
choose, V.
this is how science works. Exactly, it's appeal to authority. This is why when a judge has to decide on something scientific, they call an expert. It's not up to the judge to study the shit. So I
And this
found
shows
it.
me
Okay.
you understand nothing about how science works, but go ahead.
All right. Well, you know, in your psych eval, it says that you have a different interpretation of the world that belongs to you. So I'm not going to argue on that. Let's just say it's your opinion. Nature refers to all of the genes and hereditary factors that influence who we are, from our physical appearance to our personality characteristics. And nurture refers to all of the environment variables that impact who we are, including our early childhood experience, how we were raised, our social relationship, and our surrounding culture. That those are the fixed definitions that you have to be in. If you want to change those definitions, you have to issue a different paper.
All right, I'm going to frame my video's point within those definitions. You said the words how we are raised, right?
Yes.
And that's in the definition of nurture, right?
It's part of the definition, yes. The definition is a lot broader.
The point of my video is to say there is the way you are raised is influenced by your parents, and your genes that are inside of you, they were also inside your parent. Do you agree with this point?
In your definition, you have omitted the social relationships, the surrounding culture, the environment variables as well that impact who we are.
No, I'm saying that even in the definition you laid out, that some of the words that you said in nurture also include an element of nature. Do you agree with this statement?
You are shortening the definition. It is correct, but you are omitting when we define who we are. It's not just how we are raised, it's also social relationship and the surrounding culture, as well as the environment.
Fine. There are other things, but let's talk about this thing, parental care.
Okay.
Parental care is classified within nurture in your categorization, but you agreed and acknowledge that the parents contain the genes that will be in the child.
All right.
And that I guess that you would follow me on the conclusion that the emotions of parents and the way they interact, their preferences, their brain is shaped by genes.
The emotions they interact is not only shaped by genes, it is also shaped by the environment, their social relationship, and their surrounding culture that the parent is in.
I didn't say only.
Yeah,
I said that they were.
Fair enough. Right.
Do you think that their brain would be there? In other words, what I'm asking, do you think that their brain would be there and would be in that way if there was no DNA at all in the world?
No.
All right. So you admit, and we agree on the fact that nurture includes elements that are influenced by the very genes that we're looking at in twin studies, what we call nature.
Well, when we say nature, it's not the colloquial term of the environment and stuff like that. It's the genes that the parents were born with. However, we're talking about behavioral, right? How parents behave, not how parents are born. And the way parents behave, yes, it is influenced by the genes to a certain degree. You'll have to prove how much by doing a study if you wish. But it's also influenced by the society the parents live, by the surrounding culture that the parents live, as well as the environment that the parents live. The child of the parent is influenced by the parent's genes to a small degree, as well as the other things that constitute nurture coming from the parents. And the child himself is also influenced by environmental factors, by the social relationships, and the surrounding culture that the child is in.
So you just said that the influence of parents on the child was small. Do you have a reference for that?
Okay, I take it back. I don't know the percentage of the influence of the parents on the child. It can depend. I suppose, if from person to person, but the scientific definition does say that it's more than the influence of the child of the parents.
I'm so happy with the states we've reached, V, that I will unblock you. You've admitted that you don't know. It's beautiful, V.
But it was in my video that I don't know. I believe in the beginning.
This was my plan all along. This was my plan all along.
If you had watched my video, I said that I don't know why you tagged me personally. I assume it's for clickbait shit, and it's for internet circus. This is not my theory. I didn't make it, but I will defend it as far of my knowledge. If you want to discuss science and educate the people watching you, as you claim, you should actually get a scientist. If you want to talk microbiology with me, I'm more than happy to talk about microbiology with you. But if you want to talk about biology, you should get another biologist who disagrees with you and have an interesting conversation. I would watch that as well. But I don't think it's fair what you're doing. It reminds me of how creationists would talk evolution with students that are in social sciences. And of course, none of them would be able to respond. And therefore, the creationists talking about evolution would be proven right. Just because I don't have an answer doesn't mean you're correct.
Word salad, but I still love you, V.
Yeah,
Okay.
look at that, guys. Look at that.
Well,
Beautiful.
yeah, well, I hope that the people who have listened can have the mind of their own.
Hang on,
No,
hang on. Wait, V, both
Yeah.
of you. This is to both of you. Gabriel Lopez just threw $10. I'm gonna double check. Baruch just called and pointed out that JF and V are gay for each other.
Well, I don't know. I'll have to do an IQ test to find out. But the thing is, I don't. Right. So I don't accept the thing that what you say it's a word salad, right? Because what exactly of what I said do you disagree with?
Oh, well, you make a loose comparison between the current discussion and first you did anti-vaxxers earlier, and now you talk of science and how science work. I mean, I don't care about all this. All I care about is that you've acknowledged that within even the definitions you use of nurture and with which you are satisfied, there are genes, and they are the very same genes that are in the children, as it turns out.
Okay, and
so
do you
I'm
agree
fine
that
with
your
it.
thumbnail on your video is nature is nurture?
If I remember, the thumbnail is not that at all. I will
Let me
check
check it
It would
as
be an
well,
error
yeah.
if it is. I think that it is nurture is nature.
Okay, right.
You got it
So
wrong there.
okay, fair enough. Is
Yeah.
this the thumbnail then? Nurture is nature.
Nurture is nature, not nature is nurture. That
Fair
would be
enough,
totally
fair
opposite
enough.
to my view.
This is
Okay,
beautiful.
and using the scientific definitions, would you still maintain your thumbnail?
Absolutely. Nurture is nature. Absolutely. I stand by this statement.
Okay, so the scientific definition of nature is not the colloquial one we use, right? You're just saying it's the genes of the parents, and I'm saying that nurture includes far more than the genes of the parents. So you can't say that A equals B.
I don't say equals. That's what you'd seem not to understand. I've explained this before. Is does not mean is equal to. Is can mean a relationship of containment. I say that nurture is contained within nature.
Okay, so nurture, by the definition, talks about environmental variables. Nature is the genes. Are the environmental variables genetic?
I don't know of much environmental variables that vary across individuals on Earth, which are not genetic in origin. I'd love to hear it, but
Okay.
I mean, unless we're talking about the radon gases that are come from the center of the Earth and are emitted, generally everything that's around you, I look around me, there's not a single thing that's not been touched by DNA. The floor has been made by a DNA-based being. The Diet Coke can has been produced by a DNA-based being. The walls are made of wood, which are DNA-based being. There's not that much that vary between people that's not due to DNA.
Right, and this is where you lose me. Because when you start saying like that, if I were to use your definition in a research, I wouldn't even know where to begin. Right? For instance, environmental variables. Let's say that a child is born, like in that case where the Australian father locked his daughter in a bunker and had sex with her, made like 12 kids. They were sitting there for 30 years. They weren't exposed to sunlight, and the development of the children was heavily malformed, partly also because they never experienced sunlight. So not experiencing sunlight is not a genetic component, is not part of nature, and your statement is that nurture is within nature, and thus is not accurate.
Well, the fact that he did not experience sunlight is due in large part to the fact that the harasser or abuser that you presented had a psychological drive to do these things. And the guy has been produced by a DNA strand, a genome.
Right. So you are now pushing this idea of heavy determinism upon the world, which is
Nope.
nice and all, but it is philosophical. It's not scientific.
There's a difference between saying there is a cause that is genetic and saying genetics causes everything. That's where you miss my statement. You pass just 1 millimeter beside my statement, but it leads you to very bad conclusion about what I'm really saying. What I'm saying is that most of what you see on Earth, including the abuser who raped the child and hides it from sunlight, one of the causes of this is genes.
Yeah, but no, I'm not disapproving with this, that one of the cause is the genes. However, there are several other causes that the way you're explaining the theory and the way I see people in your comment section explaining it as well, completely misrepresent it. So you considering you want to educate YouTube and you want to have this PhD level Twitter, you're not doing a very good job if that's the case.
Well, now that I've dismantled your strawmanning of me, you have the opportunity to do an actual video where you would explain to my audience, and I will send every single one of the people in my audience, I will send them to your video. If you do an honest video where you explain what is wrong with my view, what is it that I'm missing with this view, but not the imagined view that you presented at your first video, the actual view that I'm laying out today in front of you.
Well, I never claimed I'm an educator. I don't want to have this PhD level Twitter. This is, these are your
my
claims.
territory, and I just won the education territory on YouTube.
Well, yeah, you
can
wanted
continue the anti-SJW stuff. I'm sure you will be very successful. I'll continue educating.
You want the discussion against another YouTuber that's not a biologist. If you want to actually have this debate, as I said, find an actual biologist
Every single biologist in the world is welcome to my stream.
Well, when you find one and you have a debate, maybe you'll convince me. The reason I talked about anti-vaxxers was to make a point. It's very hard for the layman who doesn't have an initiate in the field of science to understand if the person explaining the science is not omitting something on purpose in order to misguide the person. And if you don't have the entry-level science, then you will not know if that's the case. And I given the example of how anti-vaxxers operate. It's not to compare you with one, but it's to explain how people can use science in order to completely manipulate the masses. They claim that every vaccine has mercury, which is false. Vaccines have a compound that contains mercury. So it's just a half-truth that they omit. The compound that contains mercury is not harmful. And it's the same like saying, for instance, chlorium, which can be found in salt, is also found in mustard gas. And then people who know this, they will just make the conclusion, don't eat salt because it can kill you. This is the same what anti-vaxxers do. So this is my warning towards people. Don't learn the science from YouTube. Go to an actual textbook and study it if you're passionate about the science.
That's another issue I take with you, V. If you want to take it, okay, go ahead, Andy.
Just real fast, sorry for interrupting, but Damien Della Hurita threw $20 to say, how much do I need to pay in Super Chat to get invited to the conversation? I could express some points to help reconcile both sides. If he went on the waiting room on your Discord,
just go on the waiting room and let us know what's your nickname.
Yeah, so Damien, just go down there or email me, andyworski@gmail, and we'll go from there. All right.
Now, my point is, I take issue with this lowering of the threshold that V does to YouTube. I'm sorry, V, not everyone takes YouTube as a trolling enterprise. I take YouTube very seriously. And so if you want to set the threshold low for your channel, I'm all fine with it. But don't discard everything because it's on YouTube. There's a lot of good content on YouTube. I work very hard for my content to be scientifically accurate. And I take it as an insult when you say, don't trust YouTube. You're on YouTube, V.
When I hear the term YouTube scientist, it brings a smile because it reminds me of a certain academics please respond type of scenario. I mean, if you want yourself to be considered a scientist, I mean, that's cool. But my advice is still people who want to learn, they shouldn't watch YouTube, any channel on YouTube to learn the science. They should actually go to a textbook. YouTube is mostly based for entertainment. Sure, you can learn something, but it's like saying I learned science from the Discovery Channel. You're not going to be able to become a biologist and go actually work in an institution by learning biology from the Discovery Channel.
I fully disagree with this. If people want to learn on YouTube, what they should do is learn to recognize facts, learn to recognize trauma, learn to recognize false argument, why some arguments are good for certain demonstrations, but not good for others. Work on your mind, work on the philosophy behind science, and you will understand how to make your way through any sort of bullshit and reach the truth.
Do you live by how you preach? Do you learn science by watching Discovery, or did you learn science by actually going to a university and studying the textbooks?
I often say that I did do the university stuff, but that most of what I know about the world, I learned it outside of university.
Okay, but would you disconsider university altogether then? Like, would you be comfortable hiring someone to work in your private lab if the law allowed it? If you would have just said, well, I learned my science from Discovery. Like, are you confident that that person would be able to perform the jobs that he is saying?
I mean, I am not an employer in science. What I would say is that if that person was to come to me with a statement of fact and say, I have the data to support my facts, I would not discard him because he went on Discovery Channel.
You like to talk about
this?
percent. Let me just get this.
May I ask a question just for like on both your sides there? I think what V's trying to say is if you want to become a legit scientist with like a PhD or all that stuff, that you should be reading a textbook and going to school. But I think what JF is saying as well, as if you have the facts and they're correct, that it doesn't hurt for someone who maybe doesn't want a PhD but wants to gather some information or knowledge about a particular subject they may be interested in, just to watch a video about it by someone who is not only qualified but at least has facts on their side. Meaning, say you want to learn about our solar system, and then you found a YouTube video that has someone who has read a textbook but has made it in a more entertaining, more contained package for entertainment purposes and for gaining knowledge.
For instance, if I can expand on that, you'd be more likely to trust. Okay, you would you might hire somebody who has a marketing degree they got off the internet, but you wouldn't want to hire a surgeon who got their degree off the internet, right?
Yeah. I mean, JF talks about percentages all the time, and the likelihood of certain people doing certain things, and he's usually against giving a single example of something that contradicts his theory. So I wouldn't say that it would be a fair assumption that someone would ever hire people based on the fact that they studied science from the internet.
So Damien, who was the super chat guy, joined us. Damien, you will have to unmute yourself. Are you there? Damien, hello.
Yes, can you hear me now?
There you are. What's up, bud?
Great. How are you guys doing?
Good, man.
Good.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll try to kind of summarize this quickly. I watch you both. I watch the streams, all that blah, blah, blah nonsense.
I appreciate
I'm a big fan of all the shows and everything. Yeah, so I'm a fan of V. I like him. I'm a fan of JF, fan of Warsi, all you guys. So I'm going to go try to get right into the intellectual aspect of this because I was actually thinking it through. Oh, I can't hear JF. I see him talking, but I can't hear him.
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
Oh,
I'm not talking.
Oh, okay. Sorry. The delay in the stream I'm watching. So one of the ways, so I think V is missing the mark. I understand the point V is trying to make, but I think he's talking past you, JF. And the reason is because it's a difference in looking at nature versus nurture in the sense of micro versus macro. You have to look at them in a framework, because at a micro level, if you're talking about, for example, the development of a child, well, you have to have a conversational method, a conversational framework to be able to talk about just that micro time window of the development of a child. So then, yes, you can segment out what is being described by the definitions as nature and nurture, so that you can have a conversational framework to talk about that micro time scale of the development of that child. However, as soon as you back out and do what I'm calling a regression, as soon as you regress back and you look at how did that environment get there? Why are the parents there that way? Why are the books that the child's reading part of the environment? Why are those specific books? As soon as you actually do a mental regression in your head to the macro level, you realize that everything is there because of nature. So the scales are different in terms of how you're looking at the framework. Yes, conversationally, the definitions V is using, etc., he's correct in the sense that if you're trying to just have a conversation about, let's make a very narrow micro framework to look at the development of a mind and then determine why did they make their political opinions, why did they do, etc. Well, yeah, you need a conversational way to talk about nature and nurture, environment affecting them versus directly the genetics. However, as soon as you do regression, the mental exercise of a true regression in your head, and you say, well, how did that environment get there? JF is correct. And as a matter of fact, the way it's defined in science doesn't truly represent that full regression. I don't mean in general science. I mean in the definitions that V is using here.
I've never. Okay, so I want to clarify this. I'm not saying if JF is wrong or not, right? GF, if he wants to use this, as you said, he is using a philosophical definition, or he has a hypothesis that he needs to prove and issue a peer review. All right. So if you contradict him on it, if you're going to say, no, JF, I think you're wrong, I view it differently, he can't call you a science denier based on it, right? Because
well, let me tell you,
the science denying thing is an insult, right? Because science gets shit done. Like your computer works because of science, light works because of science, so on and so forth. So people who are doubting science are called science deniers, not philosophy deniers.
Except I did not call you a science denier for the strawmanning exercise of your late video.
No, that's okay. Your subscribers did that. You educated them, I guess.
I called you a science denier for another thing, which is you stated genes influencing political preference. I don't believe that. You said that, and that's why I called you a science denier.
Yeah, I told you to prove it. You showed me the studies, and then I said that it's what was the conversation? It was when Richard Spencer was there, right? So your statement was more in the absolute. It was in the conversation was that genes influence science, period, right? It wasn't that genes have an influence of science. I said I don't believe it. You showed me the studies, and then I made the video talking about it. I never said that genes don't influence politics because, for instance, there's a difference between men and women. It makes sense that women and men vote differently. But I disagree with the...
You did say I don't believe that, and later you admitted in your late video that you misworded stuff, but you said it.
You should have contacted me. You should have questioned me, right?
I don't contact people. I take their word on the public space. That's
so you're basically taking the literal definition of the sentence rather than the spirit of what they're saying. This is like a little gotcha. It's like haha, and then you make a video about them misrepresenting what they have said. If you looked at my previous videos that I have made before the stream, you'll notice that this is not my position at all. The only reason that I was a little bit peeved is because you framed it in an absolute sense that, you know, politics is influenced by genes, period.
Well, if I could interrupt.
Yeah.
If I can just interrupt for a second, because again, I think you both are actually talking past each other to a certain degree because you're caught up in the whole gotcha thing or whatever. And I understand that part of that circus is part of the entertainment. But what I'm trying to do is actually reconcile to get to the truth of the 2 points. So V, would you at least agree that at a micro level, if you're looking at a micro level, of course you need a framework like you're describing and what the definitions are to have a conversation about the micro level. But would you agree, V, that if you did a full regression in your mind all the way back to the Big Bang, right, of our entire causal universe, and you would see that everything follows that regression trail? It doesn't matter if it's a book, it doesn't matter whatever it is in the micro scale you're looking at, that at the macro scale, we're doing the regression all the way back of the entire universe.
Hey, what is this philosophical shit? Can you tell me the scientific theory?
It's not,
I can look at it.
V, honestly, wait, V, it's not philosophical. I'm talking about science. What I just described there is not philosophical. Everything right now, if you take a snapshot, regresses back to some moment to the Big Bang. Would you agree with that? I'm just talking about science.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So if that's the case, by the way, the argument I'm making here is giving validity to your argument just in the case of the micro scale. So if you agree with that, that's just science. That's not philosophical. That's a scientific truth, right, about what we know about the universe. Would you agree with that too, JF?
Yeah, that is
absolutely
correct.
I like this metaphor.
Okay, so if you start at that point of agreement, then you can start to go forward through the regression and say, okay, yes, if you're taking a developing mind and you're trying to figure out what percentage of nature versus nurture has affected their mind to make a political decision. Well, at a micro scale, to have the conversation, yes, you can say at a micro level, we're going to make the separation that the books that are in the house that he's reading that's the environment. So that's nurture versus nature at the micro scale. But in literal terms, in literal terms, if you take that snapshot and regress all the way back through the entire history of the universe, everything traces back to then nature. In other words, you can theoretically trace back why the environment is the way it is to a biological scenario, right? Why are the parents in that location? How did they get there? What, and you can trace all that all the way back to, you know, the amoebas that existed first, right? To the first replicating, you know, genes. So at what I'm trying to do is reconcile you both. It's not about, you know, the gotchas and all that kind of stuff. It's fair for you to say, okay, I want to talk about in a micro sense.
No, I understand your point. Okay, hold on. I understand your point, right? So you're basically saying, and please tell me if I'm straw manning you or not, that at the macro scale, everything is genetic, purely genetic.
Right, and when I say that, I mean in a literal sense.
Yeah, like the books that I'm having is because the genes of the people who wrote it.
It regresses more back than that, but that's the simplified version.
Okay, what if I were to tell you that maybe the book that I'm reading, the author once stood in a very chilly environment, like he fought in World War II, where he got into a trench and it was really, really chilly, and that environmental experience that has nothing to do with genes, in this case temperature and the wind, influenced him from writing a book. Okay,
the reason why he was there, how was he even there? Did he even exist there to be in that environment? What does that regress back to?
Okay, that is the genetic that is the genetic component that I don't disagree exists. However, besides the genetic component, there is another factor, which in this case is the environment, which affected him to writing the books. For instance, right? Why do people build ships? Right? People build ships because there is the genetic environment. I'm really tired, so please excuse me if I'm.
No, I'm with you. I'm with you.
The reason people, for instance, build boats is because there was a water source next to them, which thing, which is not genetic, got them to build the boats. And for instance, this is why Europe, in my opinion, is one of the most advanced civilizations we have today. It's because of the geography and the mountains and other natural barriers, which allow for different states to exist that competed with each other and caused warfare. And within warfare, they had the need to invent as many technological advancements as possible in order to get the advantage over everyone else. So yes, there is the genetic component, the people of Europe, but it's also the geographical component and the climate, which is the temperate climate, which makes for agriculture and harvesting fields really efficient. So even at the macro scale, I wouldn't say that everything is genetic. There are it does play a part. No one disagrees.
Sure, but I would say you're simply not doing the regression far enough in your mind. If you keep regressing further back, I would say that what you're framing is just the difference in what we're going to define as micro or macro. If you actually keep doing the regression mental exercise in your mind, you'll see that all the things you mentioned eventually trace back to nature. Right? There is nothing in what you described there.
Again, I disagree, because if planet Earth was of a different geographical formation, and the temperature wouldn't have been what it is, and water wouldn't exist, then you wouldn't have the natural part. So again, I'm not saying that genes don't play a part. Of course they do, right? No one is going to deny that. But there are other environmental factors such as temperature, climate, meteorological conditions, rock formations, so on and so forth, that affect how a civilization behaves. Like, for instance, in Africa, because of the not in Africa, in Norway, for instance, because of the very cold climate, people there couldn't farm, they couldn't have agriculture, so they had to raid. These are other things outside of the genes that influence how a people behave.
Sure. And what I'm trying to do is actually get what you're describing to put it in a framework in which the understanding is that if we're going to have a conversation just about an individual, a very micro scale conversation, then yes, you need some sort of framework to talk about, okay, we understand that
this is what psychologists do, like you have a person that, let's say, has...
But it's not what I'm describing
what I'm trying to get... No, let me finish my point, right? Because I don't want to be strawman. If an individual goes to a psychologist and he has several behavioral issues, the psychologist can go further back to his childhood and find out that maybe one of his parents got hit by lightning or some shit, and that traumatized him for life. Which is why now he needs to get through that traumatic moment in order to be able to have a healthy life in society. So there's many factors that influence the growth of an individual.
So I'm just going to try to, I understand what you're saying. So in the case you just made, I'm going to use the examples you're making.
Yeah.
The kid who's struck by lightning.
The father. Is struck by lightning.
Or the father, yeah. So what needed to happen in order for the father to exist in that moment to get struck by lightning in that environment? And all I'm saying is that
I can see where you're going, right? But this is like this idea of determinism that basically it was the father's decision to be in that place so he can get struck by lightning. Okay.
No, I understand. But what I'm doing, I am not using I don't have any predisposed bias to what side of this matters. I'm simply taking the standpoint of understanding that we live in a causal universe. And doing
I understand your theory. I completely understand your theory, but I reject it. I mean, you can have this philosophical view that everything is caused by the decision of the person.
You reject physical causality, V, at this point.
Yeah. So V, let me kind of I want to make sure, because I want to make sure that this is clear. The position I'm holding.
No, listen, why I'm saying this. No, listen why I'm saying this. You're asking why was the father there to be struck by lightning, and your reaction is just genes, period, right? But I am telling you... No,
that's not what I said. That is strawmanning me. You just
okay, fine. Repeat them. Just let's go over this again.
I said it's nature. That includes genes. It's nature. The causal universe. Yeah. And so in other words, anything that you want to take that is described as nurture, so for example, social norms, interactions, anything that spawns out of our quote unquote nature, any of that can trace back, has to, the only place it can be located in a full regression is in nature. There's no other place to exist.
Nature, by the definition, are the genes the person was born with. So that father was born with certain genes. That is nature, period. The lightning, in this case, by the scientific definition, is part of nurture because nurture includes the environment. This is the problem when we're mixing colloquialism, like how people talk day to day, with the scientific definition.
Right, but two things are happening here. Wait, let me do this is a great point.
So let's say the parent was born in a certain way. How exactly did he get struck by lightning 40 years ago? Like after 40 years after he was born.
Wait, V, you went past the distinction. I think it's important. Okay, you took
that.
We're talking about colloquialism.
Guys, we crossed over. We basically meshed up nature and nurture now. So we need to address what we mean when we're saying nature, and we need to address what we mean when we say nurture.
The definitions are clear. Right. The definitions are very clear. Nature is the genetic component of what the person is born, period. Nurture is everything else, right? So the society, the upbringing of his parents, the environment where he lives in, meteorological conditions, and so forth.
So from a micro standpoint, I'm agreeing with you, V. I'm on your side. I'm agreeing with you there. In other words, in the micro scale of talking about your example of the father that got struck by lightning, yes, you would use those exact definitions that you mentioned, not as colloquialisms. I'm talking about literally the definitions that you mentioned. You would use those to describe in that micro scale what is nature and what is nurture. But there's a distinction to be made to JF's video, because JF's video did two things. One is he was unpacking how you were looking at it and unpacking how you should look at, based upon actual science and the definitions, on what percentage, right? So we're talking about a proportion, right? I want to stay away from these absolutes. You said all genetics are all this. We're talking about a proportion, and that proportion matters, right? If it's a low proportion.
I never denied that there are different proportions to the things that influence the nurture.
And But JF did something else, and this is the distinction to make. JF was also challenging this kind of common notion that there's this somehow this separation. And JF's greater point, and correct me if I'm wrong, JF, because I don't want to strawman you, is that I'm actually trying to steelman your point, JF, is that if you actually look at the literal truth, that separation doesn't exist. It's simply in order to have a conversational framework. And he was actually challenging even the state of those definitions.
Okay, let's go back.
It's a false dichotomy, and that it's often interpreted in a dichotomous way when it is not.
Okay, the issue is let me see if I understand your point, right? So on a micro level, you understand the importance of making the distinction between nurture and nature, correct?
Well, I don't know anything about importance. I'm just saying, in order to make a distinction at a micro level, it's fine to have that conversation.
Okay, so it's fine to have that conversation, as I say. I call it scientific, but whatever, right? So at the micro scale, you would include even, how the European civilization was influenced through nature and nurture due to the geographical area. I mean, this is geographical determinism, which is a theory. So it's not something that I make up, basically.
Well, V, once you get to the macro level.
Okay, yeah. So when you get to the macro level, right, which is even above that on how you have the European civilization formed, you then go to the idea that everything is genetic. Okay, fine. But if you want to go to the macro level, is influenced by genes. Okay. So when you go to the micro level, you can't use the macro idea because it doesn't help and it doesn't work in this sense. Like if you want to, just
it still works. It's just about proportion in the conversation. So,
yeah, okay.
but I'm glad you. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah, you would have to find out which proportion of nurture makes up an individual, right? So how much percent his parents' upbringing make him, how much percent did the environment, how much percent did the society, how much percent did the ideology and other people around him influence him, correct?
Sure. So what I'm trying to tease out there is that yes, you can do that in that scale. It doesn't negate the macro view of it. It just, you have to decide how far you're going to say that regression is back, right?
Yeah,
in order to make any kind of
but if we're talking about like the subject, as JF put it, and again, a theory should stand on itself. But fine, let's do this. So the study that the thing that JF wanted to talk about is that Muslim parents did their kids to be Islamic, and therefore, he doesn't care the percentage of how much is it their upbringing or how much is it, their genes. He came to the conclusion that it's happening, period. Case closed. Is this correct, JF?
Well, I would reframe your last sentence a little bit. I say in a free society, that's the percentage we get. And there is no way that is not authoritarian or overly invasive of personal freedom that we know of, other than taking the baby and removing him from his family, to make a baby that is destined to become Muslim through his parent, not become Muslim.
Okay, so in our society, if I go around and call Muhammad a pedophile in certain countries where they have a Muslim issue, that person would immediately be arrested. In Canada, for instance, sorry, not arrested, but he would be fined, and he would probably face a few NGOs that would sue him. If I were to talk against Islam in some countries, like the UK, for instance, you could lose your job because you're labeled an Islamophobe. Do you view them as free societies, or do you view this as culture being very authoritarian, and in some cases even the government being authoritarian?
Clearly, those are authoritarian cases.
Okay, so if we were to remove those, maybe, if you could be able to teach the downsides of Islam at school when factually accurate, not not religious nonsense or propaganda, just actually present the facts. Maybe if on television you would show the poor state of Islamic theocracies in the Middle East. Maybe when there's a terrorist attack, we could also show pictures of dead kids, like they do with Syria. Whenever CNN makes an article about Syria and they show a gas attack, they show dead children. They never do that with Nice and some shit like that. Would you not consider that it's possible the percentage of people who remain Muslims being exposed to these atrocities that they are not exposed now would probably be compelled to renounce their faith?
Well, I will say your earlier example is irrelevant because the numbers I was talking about is in free societies like Canada and the US. There is no authoritarian.
We just concluded by your statement that Canada is not a free society because if you talk against Islam, you get a fine. You're considered Islamophobic. Did they pass the blasphemy law? Because that's the last time I read on it. They were going to pass a blasphemy law where you can't criticize Islam. I would not consider that.
I can talk against Islam. There's no problem. I mean, I would agree with removing the hate speech laws in Canada, but it's a very small case. It's not something that will influence.
No, I'll tell you why it's a small
Muslim
case.
transmission. Right now, I talk against Islam and I live in Canada. No one knocks at my door to arrest me. So you present a case where we would have a public discourse to convince people of not being Muslim. That's what
not convince people of not being Muslim. It would be a public discourse, just the same one that destroyed Christianity in Europe, especially like in Britain. It didn't eradicate it, but a lot of people identify as atheists more every single year. And Christianity, even the people who are Christians, they don't go to church on Sunday. They don't pray. They're not like the Christians that we had 100 years ago. And by the way,
we would not convince them of not being Muslims.
I am saying that the purpose would not be necessarily to convince them of not being Muslim. The purpose would be to expose the truth, to talk about everything that people want in a free way. Of course, there will also be people who are promoting Islam and they would not be hampered, but there would also be people who talk against it. And UJF said, well, people don't knock at my door. The reason they don't knock at your door is because they don't give a fuck about you. But the moment you start actually gaining people, the moment you start becoming somebody like... for instance, what is the good imam? You know, I forgot his name, but there's this Australian imam who talks against Islam. You will be targeted by also Muslim radicals who are going to literally try to kill you, and they're also going to be targeted by the government with different fines, different interdictions. So that's why the government doesn't come to you, because they don't find you as a problem. They're not going to target each and every citizen. They will only target the people who actually make an influence.
So that's what I've been asking in the VEE debate. I was asking, do you have a solution that will make immigrants not act like they do now? You claim that if we were to remove authoritarian control of Canadian complaining against Islam, that this would solve the problem and that there would be less Islamic people training their children to be Islamic?
I'm not saying that it will solve the problem, but certainly it will improve the problem the way it is now. Yes, you can actually use more things that are not authoritarian. For instance, you could limit immigration from cultures that are incompatible. You could just say like a list of countries so you don't target a specific faith. You could then be able to remove hate speech laws, so people will be able to talk against Islam without being branded an Islamophobe. Articles and papers could be written against Islam without receiving a fine from the government. Televisions could also talk against Islam, and schools would be able to have certain curriculums that would be able to expose how life is in Saudi Arabia, or why theocracies are the worst place to live in. And certainly this will limit the number of Muslims. I think everyone would agree with this. Because if it would...
Certainly this would limit the number of Muslims. Do you have any idea of the interventions that you claim would work? And in fact, we're already deploying these interventions. Richard Dawkins is already out there talking against religion. You are already out there talking against religion. I'm saying the result of your work, V, is that 80% of the Muslims still brought up their children to be Muslims. What else do you have? Do you have evidence that there is a solution other than those we've already deployed?
Richard Dawkins has cocked immediately. I remember after tweeting an anti-Islamic video, he was viciously attacked by both progressive people, Muslim people as well. The reason I'm saying my issues would work is because there are being millions of dollars coming from Saudi Arabia funneled into mosques in order to keep the current status quo, in order to make anti-Islamophobia a thing. So I'm willing to bet that if people invest so much amounts of cash into this, then clearly it must do something.
So we still don't have a solution. Richard Dawkins is a cock, is not a solution. The original question in the VEE debate was, do you have a solution to the problem that the immigrants we've already invited in Canada, they've already become citizens and they have a higher birth rate. Do you have a solution to make them to make them not stick to their own culture, but integrate them to the Canadian culture in a way that they will not keep voting for more immigrants, keep voting for more left-wing policy, keep increasing their proportion in the population, both through increased birth rate and through increased immigration through democratic control. Do you have any solution so that these people one day become Canadians or Americans or whatever country they joined?
So as I said, by removing hate speech laws, there will have more and more people talking up against it till the point where actual Islamic people are going to find the culture insufferable, because I believe the overwhelming amount of Canadians aren't Muslims and they're bothered by Muslims. Perhaps a lot more people will speak out if it's socially acceptable, not just legally allowed, because right now in Canada, it's not only illegal, but it's also social unaccepted. You'll not be viewed as in good company if you talk against Islam. So a lot of Muslims will find the new culture to be insufferable. Some of them will leave. The rest who stay are going to adapt. You can then apply the law. For instance, if you have people that are imposing Sharia law patrols, that is vigilantism, that is a crime. They can be arrested and deported if they have dual citizenship. If people are, for instance, disturbing the public peace by doing for instance, marches that are saying, oh, well, behead those who insult Islam, that's for instance, would fall under inciting people to violence. I mean, there was this imam as well who was saying you need to kill all gay people because it's out of compassion. The shit needs to be cracked down. The shit doesn't need to be allowed. You can install cameras in mosques, for instance. That is also a public space, so that would not be a violation of anyone's rights. It wouldn't be authoritarian. Yeah, there are plenty of solutions. They're not one solution that will work. It's not black and white. Islam is a culture that is attacking the West on many fronts, and there's many people doing it. So it will need an equal pushback from the same number of people that right now can't do it because of the hate speech laws.
All right, Andy, I'm satisfied with this. V is suggesting that we change the law to allow anti-immigrant bigotry. I'm satisfied. I don't have anything to add.
That is not what I said. If removing hate speech laws will make you an anti-immigrant bigot, that will be your choice. But I believe most people in your countries will not be against immigrants, period. You know, maybe they will just be against radical Islam, against the Islamic ideology, and they will be fine if the immigrants will just accept Canadian values and they will be allowed to stay there, for instance. Again, no one is going to force them to leave. You know, some will still be Muslim, for instance, but they will just have to tolerate a different culture. Another example that you could use.
You sound like the guy from England. You sound like England. So they're gonna have to stay. They're gonna have to tolerate the tasing.
Yeah, but I haven't talked about tasing anyone. I haven't talked about the government removing any.
You talked about making their life unsufferable so that they choose.
Well, yeah, I mean, the culture of Saudi Arabia would be unsufferable for me. I'm not allowed to drink alcohol. I'm not allowed to eat pork. I chose to go there, right? So I believe if I go to a country, that country should become shouldn't become more Romanian. I should become more Saudi if I go to Saudi Arabia, for instance. Another thing that you can do in Canada, and again, all of what I'm saying is not authoritarian. It's not illegal. It's within the framework of the democratic system. You could ban halal meat on the purpose that it is cruelty towards animals. You have laws against animals cruelty in Canada. So therefore, this would be considered savagery. So halal meat would not be able to be imported.
All of this I've heard from the alt-right, so I'm satisfied of the progression we've made, V, and I will unblock you.
Well, I want to say that if people would listen to liberalists more, would notice that the problems that both of us are noticing, both me and the alt-right have in common, but the difference is you're never going to see me asking for uncitizening people. You're never going to see me for asking for tasing people. You're never going to see me for asking for minorities to be removed from a state. Right? You can create a culture that people who don't integrate with it could be white people as well. Like a white person who doesn't like the culture, you know, he also has the freedom of leaving. But I do believe that every single nation needs to have a set of cultures that are going to be imposed. This multiculturalism is bullshit. Doesn't need to exist. There doesn't need to be another culture that's in conflict with the main culture within a nation.
All right. I'm great with this, Andy.
All right.
Thanks for having me on, mate. Hope
Epic
it was
debate.
a good discussion.
And gotcha unblocked. That's good too.
Thank you.
It's good to hear.
And thank you, Mr. What was his name? The
Z, Mr. Z.
Damian.
Damien.
Yeah, it's pronounced Damian.
Damian.
But yeah, Damian. Yeah, thanks for pulling me in. I wanted to add one more thing, just a bit of information. There's a video by, do you guys know the YouTuber Coltane?
Yeah.
Nope.
Yeah. Okay. He did a video last year called "The Biology Behind Politics," and I can send you the link, JF, if you want to post it. But in that video, he also addresses that study, the twin study that showed that there was, somewhere between a 30 to 60% influence, right, of genetics. He actually addresses that with another study that actually separates out the big 5 personality traits. And the biggest influence, the biggest percentage of the big 5 personality traits came up to be 61%, which is openness on that twin study. And he completely breaks that down in the video. So it's worthwhile to look at that just to maybe get a little bit more of an updated kind of framework or analysis on the genetic influence based upon the big 5 personality traits.
All right. Just send me the link and we'll add it in the description. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All
right. Once again, the blood sports makes actual advances.
Yeah. Yeah, that was great, guys. Perfect. And Mr. Z, what'd you think about that?
I think that was very satisfying. I felt like it could have ended a lot earlier, though. Like, I felt it was a very nice little resolve, and then it just spiraled into something else.
Always like this with V. He makes progress, and then he steps back. It's these saw-like increase. He gets high a lot, gets down. Gets high a lot, gets down. It's a wave thing. When you're accustomed to it and you're V's friend, you just learn to deal with it. And you try to just look for the positive.
Yeah, no, it was beautiful. It was beautiful. Any final thoughts, Monsieur Z? Thanks for sticking around, by the way.
Oh, absolutely. Final thoughts. I think JF and V managed to at least settle the whole micro aspect of it. Macro, that's a whole different thing because, you got to factor in certain things about nature overlap with nurture, and I don't see them agreeing with that. But, we'll have maybe another debate like that. What do you think, JF? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, awesome. I think we're not done. We're really not done. What we went through is the problems that emerged from the late video responses that we've been doing, but we've clearly not reached an overall agreement.
Mm-hmm. But progress is being made.